I need foam. I need foam on these walls. It's a little too echoey. Countdown to the riff begins in 5, 4, 3, 2, riff. Hey, it's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, the show where I speak to the world's best artists about creating works, nonfiction, leaders in the world of narrative journalism, doc film, memoir, essay, and radio, and tease out habits, origins, routines, and punishing self-doubt, so that you can apply those tools of mastery to your own work. I'm your host, Brendan O'Mara. Hey. Today's episode is a little different for a couple reasons. One, it's the first in-person interview in the history of the podcast. Two, it's with an illustrator whose book, Bird Note, Chirps, Quirks, and Stories of 100 Birds from the popular public radio show, just launched. It's published by Sasquatch. Said illustrator is Emily Poole, Poole Art on Instagram, so that's Poole Art. And Emily banged out 100 original illustrations and the cover for 101 paintings in about 3 months' time. It is a gorgeous book, and she's super talented. How'd she do it? Bird by bird, buddy. Hashtag Anne Lamott. Sorry. I promised I wouldn't do it, and I did it anyway. In this episode, you'll learn about how Emily set up her days to accomplish this incredible feat of work, how she's able to process useful criticism versus criticism that's more hurtful than helpful, and why art is important in the world of conservation. Anyway, this was a fun conversation. I hope you dig it. Be sure to pick up a copy of Bird Note for the bird lover in your life. It won't disappoint, and neither will episode 96 with Emily Poole.
Really silly right now.
Why do you feel so silly?
Because I'm holding a giant microphone. Okay.
You are the first one to hold said microphone.
Cool.
All right. See, this is a good experiment that you're like the first in person.
You're gonna do so much editing on this.
There's a good chance of it, and I'm okay with that because this is gonna be well worth it. And I'm coming in way hotter than you are on this, so I'm just changing up the levels here.
Okay. All right.
So keep that. You got to keep that thing fairly close to your mouth.
That's even worse. And now I have the feeling that it's like 7th grade, the talent show. My crush is in the audience, and I'm up there trying to sing. Don't stop believing.
That is hilarious.
But the music hasn't started, and I'm here with the microphone, and everyone's looking at me.
That's great. And the thing is, no one's looking at you. And that's what makes this even better. And you sound great. Sound great. Oh, man. So, like most of the conversations I have, I always love to start at the beginning. What makes this a little on the weird side for me is that I know a lot of your story.
Yeah.
I know a lot about your backstory, but I have to like ask it as if I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes this, in a sense, for me, even weirder. So
I'm mildly concerned that I'm going to assume that you know things and forget to answer you thoroughly. So we're both a little bit. Yeah,
it is an interesting situation, and it's experimental, but I think it'll work just fine. So, all right, so we all, as we all know, you grew up in Jackson. Lots of kids, every kid draws. But you kept drawing. So, what gave you who gave you the permission to just keep on going with it instead of it being beaten out of you in middle school or high school? And that happens to a lot of people.
Well, I was raised in the middle of a swamp with no one around. So it was me and my parents, and the nearest kid was a long ways away. So I mostly just kind of had to come up with ways to to entertain myself. So drawing was really kind of what I did all day rather than playing at the local park with the other kids, because there was no local park and no other kids. So drawing and reading were kind of my hobbies, and I never really did anything else. And, you know, I'm lucky to have parents that support what I do. And so they never said, oh, you should be out playing sports ball with the other kids.
Yeah, so they didn't think you were like weird.
They let me do my thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So so much of what you draw is from the natural world and everything. So were you always just drawn to animals and have like a kind of a kinship to want to sort of like bring that off the page in a sense?
Yeah. I was going through a lot of my old sketchbooks recently, and most of my early drawings are animals of one kind or another.
So why do you
I've
think...
always drawn animals.
Yeah. So why do you some kids get into, they like to draw. Like when I was little, I know I really latched on to Calvin and Hobbes, and I I drew tons of like Calvin and Hobbes to Calvin and Hobbes ish type little comic strips, because I just really loved that stuff. And I believe his name was like
phases.
Yeah. So like, what were some of those phases?
Oh, well, there were the embarrassing ones, like, you know, cats with anime eyes was probably like 5th to 6th grade. And then 7th grade, I got really into dragons because of this one How to Draw Dragons book that all the kids were passing around.
Yeah.
So I was drawing a lot of dragons for a while. I did do comic strips for a brief period, mostly about cats, really bad jokes.
Do you have any, can you remember or recall any examples of that?
Oh. No, mostly just the anime eyes haunt me.
You just see them like in the back of in your dreams, in the back of your eyelids, these anime feline eyes. So yeah, so that was a particular phase. You said dragons too, but like eventually, like animals and specifically birds really latched onto you. Like, can you recall a moment when that really galvanized as something that was like, oh wow, that's something that I really want to lean into?
Probably not until late college, because for my first couple of years of college in art school at Rhode Island School of Design, I wanted to be a science fiction fantasy artist, and then I kind of found that scene wasn't really for me for several different reasons. And looking at my portfolio, it was sort of a mix of like creature design and animal design and stuff that I just didn't enjoy as much, but I felt I needed for my portfolio for science fiction, like people and action and everything. But I really just liked drawing the animals. And then I started to draw actual animals more and more often. And then I kind of decided, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. Mm-hmm. The actual moment that I decided that I wanted to do like natural history and especially conservation geared art was when I went on a trip with one of my professors to Guyana. Mm-hmm. And we did projects there. And we did research projects. We got to pick some sort of natural history topic, and we both researched it from a scientific point of view and also illustrated our scientific journey. And I had so much fun with that, and I thought it was the coolest work ever. And at the end, we gave a presentation to all of the local people about what we had learned, and just teaching people about the animals they lived with my art, I thought was just the greatest thing. So I leaned into it hard after that because I really, really like doing that.
So talk about your professor a little more. Like, how'd you guys get to know each other and become acquainted, and to the point where it was something, that she was willing to like sort of take you under her wing and invest in you and bring you on to a foreign country, in South America. So like, what was that relationship like, and how did you come across her?
Well, I took her class that she was teaching with another professor of mine who I'd already taken a class with. And they were jointly teaching a class called Visualizing the Natural Sciences. So he was teaching the sort of visual arts part, and she was teaching the science part. So she would present science topics to us, and then we would work on coming up with a way to visually interpret them. And the folks that did well in the course, that seemed dedicated to that sort of line of thinking and that line of artwork, she invited to come on the Guyana course afterward.
Mm-hmm. And what's her name?
Her name's Lucy Spellman, and she's a very impressive person.
Yeah.
She worked with mountain gorillas in Rwanda for a while. She was the director of the National Zoo for a long time, and she became a professor at Rhode Island School of Design after coming to this sort of realization that scientists need artists to be their voices, because scientists are great at communicating to other scientists, but as far as making the information that they find accessible to the public, sometimes it's just not engaging. People don't listen that well, and art tugs at the heartstrings, and art connects with the heart, whereas science connects with the head. So when you need stuff done in conservation, you've got to connect with the heart in order to get people to care and do anything. So science collaborating with art to reach people in a meaningful way, she decided was the most important thing to her. So she started teaching it in art school to try to realize that.
What do you think it is about art and something that's visual that can maybe like cut through so much of the noise and clutter that makes something that might be more, I don't know, esoteric or sciencey based, like it kind of makes it more accessible to maybe a common reader that might be a common reader or a common consumer of sorts that what's the word I'm looking for? Just it can have a deeper meaning. Like it seems to cut through the noise and cut through a lot of that the clutter that maybe some of the science ease fails to do. But something what you can do and accomplish is it makes it much more accessible to an average reader or average consumer.
I think accessibility is partly a lot about the venue that you experience art in, because art can be anywhere. It can be on the subway wall or on your own wall or on your Facebook feed as you're scrolling past, or really just about anywhere. And it has a way of catching the eye. That's what art is. It's designed to grab you and hold your eye and then make you think if it's good. So, not a lot of people out there, just the average Joe, are going out and reading scientific papers on, the Harvard Science School database. But art can pop up just about anywhere and grab you. And, even most people will visit a few galleries in their lifetime, even if they're not that interested in art. So I think it's kind of that dual thing of both appearing in places you don't expect when you might be ready to look at it, and just, anyone can look at a piece of art. Not anyone can read the science and understand it, but anyone can look at the art. Yeah.
And when you were really starting to sink your teeth into illustrating and painting, and you just said something like, an artist can really like grab and hold a consumer, just a purveyor of the arts. Like who was grabbing and holding you when you were coming up as an artist, developing as through high school and college? Like who were those people that were like inspiring you so much to like pick up the pen or the paintbrush and do what you're doing? Like who are those people?
Well, I have a two-part answer. A lot of artists that really inspired me are really old artists. Like Ernst Haeckel is my favorite. I would make an embarrassment of myself if I tried to say a time that he worked, because I do not specifically know. But he worked in a time where, everyone was a naturalist as a hobby. People were just really interested in the natural world, like the kind of Victorian type era, where everyone collected specimens and everyone was really into botany. And there were all these illustrators out there that were doing natural history work and illustration work, and it was all terrible. It was really, because people would get specimens, brought on a ship from really long way away, and all kinds of weird stuff had happened to the specimens on the way, or
just like wrinkled and
my absolute favorite illustration. Yeah, exactly. My absolute favorite illustrations, the illustrations done by those poor people who tried to reconstruct animals based on the descriptions of sailors who had been to places and seen the animals. So there'd be an illustrator in a London port that would, the ships would come in and he'd call up a sailor and say, describe a kangaroo to me. You have to go by a sailor's description. They're not the most reliable people.
Yeah, they've got their rum rations and everything.
Oh yes, a kangaroo. It's 15 feet tall with claws the size of your arm.
Yeah, it's got a pouch. And
got a bit of a blobby thing on the back. Yeah. So the animals they came up with from these sailors did like verbal descriptions of stuff they'd seen a while ago, while probably not, either from scurvy or whatever else in their total right minds. They're the best illustration.
Yeah.
So I really love those because people just were so dedicated to chronicling the natural world that they would put themselves through that in order to do it. And then, there are modern illustrators that I really admire. There's a person called Zoe Keller, who makes really, really great work about different ecosystems and the animals you find there. An artist named Tiffany Bozic that I really admire. Really old Russian artist named Ivan Bilibin. He's most famous for his illustrations of Vasilisa the Beautiful. But he has this beautiful, decorative painting style that I really enjoy. Like half of my inspiration is from really decorative artists because I like decoration. My art school education would frown on me for that. Mm-hmm. And then half, natural history illustrators I love.
So what do you mean
really
by decoration?
Inspires me
yeah.
Is actually like the animals themselves. I rarely see other people's work and think, oh, I want to do that. Mainly just because I've been hard steered away from imitation or anything like that. When I know being inspired by other people isn't imitation, but what really makes me want to paint is finding out about a really cool animal or plant or anything else and saying, I have to paint that so I can show other people because that is the neatest thing ever. Because there is just so much cool stuff in this world, and I just want to get it in front of people. And my art is kind of a medium for me to do that. I find out something neat, I make a painting of it, and then I put it out there and say, look at that. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. You let that do the talking for you.
Yeah.
You're like, here's this cool animal. I'm going to paint it in its most characteristic phase. And that's going to do all the talking I want it to do. Yeah. Whatever that is. Mm-hmm. And what is it specifically about birds that really sort of galvanized as your sort of the animal that really you really sort of locked into, specifically for the bird notebook?
I don't really know how that happened. I didn't really paint all that many birds, even in college when I first got into animal illustration. I never painted that many birds. And then the bird note job came along, and I really don't know how I got on the bird kick. I had drawn a few birds. I'd done some work for the Teton Raptor Center, which is a raptor rehabilitation center in Jackson, Wyoming. And they had me do some paintings and drawings of their permanent resident raptors there. And I did really enjoy that, but Bird Note was my first foray into intensive bird art. And I loved it. I loved it so much that after I did Bird Note, I was certain I'd be sick of birds, but the first thing I did after I finished Bird Note was draw another bird. Mm-hmm. And that's just about all I've drawn since then. So
it's amazing.
Started a pretty solid bird kick.
Yeah, it's amazing that, given the volume of work you did for Bird Note, that you were not just totally burned out on birds. When I spoke with Noah Stricker, in talking to him about his record-setting birding year for Birding Without Borders, like after he was done, like I kind of had a similar conversation. Like the day after he set that record of globetrotting, breaking the world record of seeing over 6,000 birds. The first thing he did the next day was go birding. And so it was just so baked into his DNA to do it. And it sounds like it's kind of similar for you.
Maybe their birds have a special power. It's a bird thing. They're just that enchanting.
Or did that surprise you that like the first, your 101st painting ended up being like another bird after doing 100 of them?
Yeah, it kind of did. But also like I'd really gotten birds down at that point. So
yeah.
But I did have a long period after that where I couldn't seem to muster any enthusiasm for painting in general. So I did have a burnout. I kind of didn't want to paint anything for a little while after I finished Bird Note. I think I just used up all my painting energy for the year in one fell swoop and just had to kind of wait out the rest of the year.
Yeah. How did you work your way through that? Or maybe the first step is to say kind of diving into the process of the book to give people an idea of the volume of work you were doing. So let's let's go right to the start of Bird Note and say how did you get that job, and what did that job entail?
Well, I got the job 6 months previously, or maybe even more. I had sent a postcard to the art director for Sasquatch Books, because that's kind of still how illustrators do it. I'm not sure why, but that's still the system. If you want to get jobs with publishers, you print out postcards of your work and you send it via snail mail. That's still how a lot of people do it, and that's how I've gotten all my jobs up until this point, which is kind of, it's kind of fun, traditional.
Right.
Kind of expensive in printing, but... and then, so 6 months after I sent that card, I actually, while I was in Guyana for the second time, I received an email, and it's memorable because we got internet access for half an hour between 4 and 4:30 a.m. at the compound that we were staying at in the interior of Guyana. Because the internet was so expensive to get out there that they didn't want people on it because it was just so pricey. So they turned it on only in the middle of the night for people that were so desperate to check their email or do whatever else that they were willing to get up at 4 a.m. to do it. So
did they tell you hey, everybody, before you go to bed tonight, set your alarm for 4 o'clock.
Yes.
Internet will be available for 30 minutes.
Yes. So I checked my email for the first time in a week at 4 a.m. and saw that this email from this art director at Sasquatch Books had been sitting in my inbox for a week.
Oh, wow.
So I immediately wrote her back, "Oh, my God, I am so sorry. Yes, I want this job. Please don't have picked someone else by now."
Yeah.
And the job was 100 illustrations, later amended to 101 when they had me do a separate book cover, which I think opens up for a lot of Dalmatians jokes that I've tried to make, but none of them quite work out. Even Dalmatians and illustrations rhyme, but I still haven't been able to make a good joke.
Yeah. Well, keep workshopping. There's something there.
100 illustrations for this book, showcasing 100 short essays on bird behavior from Bird Note, which is a podcast put on by some folks up in Seattle, same place as Sasquatch Books. And it's just a little 2-minute podcast, easy to find, go look for it, on interesting facts about birds. So they were doing this book version. It would be 1 illustration per essay, 100 essays, 100 illustrations. And the timeline for that, I think they had me start work in early April. I had to have detailed sketches by June, and I had to have all of the final paintings turned in by the end of August.
So, all right. So how were you setting up your days so you could accomplish this. And what were the shape of your days as you were doing that?
Well, I bought a calendar because I'm not on top of it. I bought a calendar and I just calculated the number of illustrations I needed to be doing per day and marked them all out on the calendar.
How many was that per day?
I know in the painting phase, it was 3 paintings a day on all my days that I got to paint. Sketches, I think maybe it was a little tighter, or maybe it was the same.
I mean, yeah, it was like a full-on sprint for...
Yeah. So I marked it all out on the calendar, and, I gave myself a little wiggle room, and I gave myself kind of like extra sort of cheat days where if I totally fell off the painting wagon, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So I boxed them all out, 3 boxes a day that I got to check off because I love checking off boxes. It's my favorite thing about to-do lists. And I just stuck to that calendar because I had to. There was no option to fail.
Yeah.
This was such a big job and such a job that I really wanted to do that turning it in late or delivering low quality work was just not even an option.
Right. It's amazing because, this is your, would you characterize this as like your first big gig out of
For
school?
sure. Yeah.
So how were you sort of processing and not getting overwhelmed by the pressure of it, as this being your first big gig pretty much out of school?
I don't know. I trusted in the same thing that got me through college, which is just, I believe in myself, enough that I know I will get things done. I absolutely will get it done if I just try hard enough. And that's what got me through a lot of really tough spots in college. I got mono during finals my sophomore year, and I still, I didn't remember making any of it, but I still put all the work on the wall during finals. I don't turn in work late and I don't turn in low quality work. Those are my 2 pillars that I do not deviate from. So everything else in my life is flexible. Those 2 things are non-negotiable.
Where does that belief come from?
I'm a little afraid that if I examine it too closely, it will shatter.
Right.
I don't exactly know. I've kind of always been like that. I'm just determined to get everything done. I don't know if that's like a teacher's pet tendency, like I don't want anyone to be disappointed in me.
Yeah.
Or I think it's more for myself. I just don't like letting myself down. And this just was a job where I couldn't let myself down.
Yeah, and like you say your parents are very supportive of your drawing and your art. Was it them that put that belief in you that you could, essentially accomplish anything you put your mind to?
Oh my God, we're soul searching. Well, I'm not like, oh, I'm amazing, I can do anything. Like,
right.
I'm a wonder of the world.
Right.
I definitely don't think that, and I do have a lot of fears. I think my parents do have something to do with it. My parents, I wish I could ask them because I'm sure they'd be able to word it better than I can. I only have my suspicions.
Right.
But I think my parents were very determined to make me self-sufficient. So whenever there was a problem in my life, rather than rushing in to fix it for me, they'd say, oh, that's too bad. What are you going to do about that? Or, oh, that's a shame that you're having a terrible time. How are you going to fix that?
Right.
So I guess I kind of I was sort of raised with the attitude of no one's going to fix this for me and I'm going to have to push through because the other option is to just lay down and die and I don't have time for that.
Right. So, what would I was having this great conversation with Kevin Wilson last week, and he wrote these great books that are like sort of focused on baseball players primarily and hitters within that discipline. And one of his major tenets is, you identify your strengths and your weaknesses, and instead of trying to level up your weaknesses to your strengths, which he argues will make you more average, he's like, his thing is like, you identify what you're strong at and you really double down on your strengths. Mm-hmm. Because most hitters or pro ball players and pro athletes, they tend to be good at one thing and they get paid for that one thing. And I wonder what would you identify as your strength? And is that something you consider yourself leaning into, or do you want to identify weaknesses and try to bring those up?
I have a tendency to lean into the strength, but I feel like I should be leveling up the weakness. Mm-hmm. Because I always feel pressured to create new work that's going to be portfolio worthy, so that I can show the people that might want to hire me that I'm creating new things, I'm getting better, and I'm always putting out new good work that'll hopefully entice them to hire me. Yeah. So I often, as much as I would like to, I often feel like I don't have the time and the pressure-free environment to work on leveling up the weaknesses, because that requires me producing a bunch of bad work that I don't want to show anyone. Right. And it's another thing that I unfortunately don't have time for a lot of the time. But there are a lot of weaknesses that I want to build up because I think they could play to my strengths once they were on that field. Mm-hmm. There are, for example, I want to do more work with decorative design, with shapes and with patterns, and just more visual design work in tandem with my more technical, drawing a bird foot. I know how to draw a bird texture. Yeah. I can draw fur. I can draw a leaf. But arranging those in a way that's visually pleasing and maybe adding in other elements that aren't animal textures, I'm not quite so strong on. And I think that once I got those skills up, then they would play into my strengths. They wouldn't be a separate thing. Mm-hmm. I just said that really badly. No, I tried.
No, I think you said it perfectly. What would you identify as something you feel particularly strong at?
Something to do with craft or something to do with anything?
Well, this being a long form type interview, given the choice between the two, I say both. So craft, go craft and then the other.
Craft wise, I really like what I'm able to do with color, which is not a me thing. It's a good art education thing. I think I got my money's worth out of RISD just on learning to work with color, because that's a thing that a lot of artists really struggle with. And I put myself through some classes I really was not at all suited for and were extremely painful to me, so that I could learn to make color work for me. And I think that was a good decision in the long run.
So much of your work, it is like very just like pleasing to look at, and that probably goes to what, being able to identify what colors work well mm-hmm. together, whether it's like your gift cards or, the 101 illustrations in Bird Note. They just feel like they just, they fall on the eye well.
That's nice to hear. Yeah, it's basically due to a couple basic principles of how color works. So with Bird Note, it almost felt like cheating, because I had to come up with a formula for producing the illustrations, which was I basically had on my palette like a section for, this is how I'm going to paint a brown bird. This is how I'm going to paint a white bird. Mm-hmm. This is how I'm going to paint a black bird. And I had the same colors that I used about every time. My justification for that being that all the work would be pretty visually consistent. All the birds would look like they were in the same world because they were painted with the same palette. But there's a couple foundations to color that carry my work through that are not me being good at color, but me just following the rules.
Mm-hmm. Are you interested in all? So you've got like, there is a particular playbook there of what colors work well together. Is there a part of you that wants to break those rules and just do something that's just cuts against the grain?
Yes. Now that I've more or less learned the rules, I certainly do not know everything. Mm-hmm. Now that I've more or less learned the rules, I'm working on starting to break them, which is one of the things that I want to level up, is my ability to work a little bit outside of the box of what I know will work, and trying some stuff that I don't know will work. I've got this really great advertising design book from like 1982 that's color palettes for advertising, and they're separated into sections by mood. So it'll be like active mood, and there will be a picture of a person in a magenta snowsuit with a bright blue sky skiing, or, angry mood, or intense, or dreamy. And these are palettes meant to be used on like billboards in the 80s. They're the most obnoxious color combinations ever, and a lot of them don't make sense to me. So my favorite thing to do when I don't know what to do with color on a piece is pull out the advertising palettes book and pick one of the palettes they've given me, and then try to make it work.
Nice. Is there a particular one, like can't get out of bed mood?
Since it's an advertising book, can't get out of bed isn't something you usually want to instill in your consumers, so they did not include that.
All right. Yeah, it could have worked for like a Zoloft commercial, I guess. So I'm still amazed that you didn't, that you were able to like, your first inclination was to still like paint birds after doing 101 of these things. It still blows my mind that you still had like a requisite or inherent love of that degree of work to want to just keep pursuing it.
So the only way to do that amount of work is to fall in love with it, because otherwise you're just going to have a terrible time.
Right.
If you're not that into painting birds and you have to paint 100 in 2 months, it's going to be rough.
Oh, man.
So I decided that I loved painting birds because that was how I was going to get through. It's because I loved doing this. Yeah. So I fell in love with painting birds, and that, that lasted until after I did the work.
So there were, undoubtedly, there were some that were probably a grind to paint through, and then there were probably others that were very exciting and very fun to do. Mm-hmm. Which ones were most fun, and which ones in the book are you most proud of? And you look at it, you open up that book, and it's just like, oh man, that's some cool shit right there.
To be honest, I think my very favorite illustration in that book is illustrating the essay on why bird poop is white. And I got a specific request from the editor of the book to paint white bird poop on a red car, which, I really like to stick to animals. I don't even like getting architecture into my work, so painting bird poop on a red car was the least appealing thing I'd ever heard. But I kind of thought, okay, I am gonna nail this one. I'm gonna make this a really good one. Yeah. I'm not gonna settle for just drawing the corner of a car and painting some bird poop on it like it's a textbook illustration. I'm gonna make this mine, just to see if I can. So I ended up doing a painting of a red car in kind of dappled sunlight, framed from above by the heads of these birds looking down on the car kind of smugly. Yeah.
It looked like there was intentionality from those birds, and they were very proud. Mm-hmm.
And I like that illustration because I'm really proud of the problem solving I did there, and also just rising to the challenge of how can I make this not inherently exciting subject still something that is pleasing to paint and will feel like my illustration at the end of it.
Yeah, that particular illustration had a very like Far Side feel to it. It's just like they were doing this with intention and spite. So, as you know, like, I love to dive into like routines and artist routines, and so like throughout this process, like when were you waking up in the morning? Like, how were you sort of checking in with yourself so you could have that productive day when you were really, had to get those 3 paintings done in a day? Mm-hmm. And so, how were you setting up your lead dominoes so, come nightfall, things were. You could go to bed, have your head hit the pillow, and be like, "All right, that's a good day. Let's get to the next day." Like, so how are you doing that?
Well, the first thing that you have to know about me as a worker is I do not compromise sleep. I don't do it. I don't ever compromise sleep. I don't cut into my sleep schedule on either end. I don't stay up late, and I don't wake up early. I did that. It didn't work out for me. I don't do it anymore. So I'd get up at a respectable 7.
Respectable 7.
Respectable 7. Make myself a cup of tea and just get working right away. When you have to work and you don't want to, or when you have to work and there's a long project ahead of you, the house starts feeling a little bit like an obstacle course. Like you got to get out of bed, and then you got to make sure you don't crawl back into bed while you're getting dressed. And then when you're going downstairs, you got to dodge that couch that looks really good, make your cup of tea, and then dodge that couch again on the way to the studio.
Yeah.
It's full of pitfalls and bear traps.
Yeah.
But if I can make it to the studio with my cup of tea without getting sucked into the black hole of a comfy piece of furniture on my way there, then I'm going to have a good day.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder than it sounds.
Well, you've got the whole thing where the bedroom's upstairs in your apartment, then you have to go down, make the tea,
and then
walk past the couch, go back up past the bedroom, and then into the studio. So, yeah, you're dealing with, like, you're just throwing hurdles in front of you the whole way.
Well, when I was working on this project, my studio was still in the living room, so my desk was right next to the couch, which was a terrible setup.
Yeah.
I literally had to buy a partition and put it between me and the couch so I couldn't see the couch. This is how much self-control I have.
I love the mind games that people have to play with themselves so that they can get the work done. Ultimately, it's all about, they always talk about the ass in the chair and this, and it's like, it's a grind. 99% of it is it's just a grind. Yeah, and you had to put up a partition so you couldn't see the temptation that was a yard away.
Yeah.
So if you were able to avoid all those obstacles, you got your butt in the chair, then what did the rest of the morning and afternoon look like?
I get some music going, or I put on one of those TV shows that you don't have to watch in order to follow, like one of those TV shows that takes place in the same room the entire time, like Friends or Parks and Rec. Like, the setting doesn't matter.
Yeah. You
can just kind of listen and they'll keep you company, or I put on music. And then I'll just go until I get hungry. Then food break, another cup of tea, keep going, dodge the couch again.
Right.
After dinner, I'm done. I cannot work after dinner. I try. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So that period between breakfast and dinner is crucial for maximum work. While I was working on this project, and the temptation to go outside is pretty strong. While I was working on this project, I was lucky, sort of, in that it was about 110 degrees for 2 months straight, and I had no temptation to go outside whatsoever.
Yeah, that keeps you inside. How did you avoid getting overwhelmed by the breadth of the project?
Well, it helped to break it down into a day-by-day plan and stick to that.
Yeah.
Like if I get my 3 illustrations done today, I'm on track. So thinking about how I have 75 more to go in the next month, I'm not going to think about that. I'm just going to think 3 today. If I've done those 3, I'm on schedule.
Yeah.
Do it again tomorrow. And that sounds very determined. I, of course, had my ups and downs.
Yeah. Did you have any days where like you did 2 one day and you're like, shit, I got to do 4 today? And then if you...
Yeah. Yes, I didn't have too many of those days because I gave myself, I was very specific about this. I overscheduled myself. So each month I gave myself 5 freebies. So if I didn't get an illustration done one of those days, I crossed off one of my 5 freebies. Yeah. And those totaled up to the number of illustrations I needed to do. So I was very strategic about planning to fail.
Yeah.
Planning to fail is probably the most important thing. If failure is in the schedule, then it's not really failure.
Right. Yeah, it's just another day.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's like in Lamotte's, it's just like bird by bird.
Bird by bird.
You just got to go bird by bird, buddy.
Yep.
You just got to keep doing, page a day is 365 pages of a book. It's just like this. You got to, incrementally, break that down. That's did anyone coach you to do it in that particular way to like make it more manageable? Did you have a mentor or someone who suggested to be like, you're likely going to run into some big projects, and the best way to sort of manage that is to break it down into those little bites instead of having to take gigantic, overwhelming bites that you can't consume or swallow or digest?
Really not a lot prepared me for the scale of that job, mainly because there are very few jobs on that scale, actually.
Yeah.
If you're working on a children's book, you're working on much more complex illustrations, but even in a children's book, it's not 100 pages. You'll do maybe 30, 35 illustrations. Still a lot of work, but not 100.
Yeah.
And most of the coaching I was getting in school wasn't even for the scale of children's books. It was for the scale of editorial illustration or advertising, doing a piece for the New Yorker. So people were coaching me on tight deadlines. If you're doing illustration for like the New Yorker or something, they'll give you your assignment on Friday and expect it Monday morning completed. That's if you're lucky. They might give it to you Thursday night and expect it Friday morning.
Yeah.
I had a professional illustrator who does a lot of high profile work who just told her whole class, don't expect to sleep if you're going to be a professional illustrator. You're going to have to stay up all night. I didn't appreciate that advice. I think that was bad advice. I think that's a terrible thing to tell people who are impressionable and relying on you for guidance, that they should just beat themselves down and run themselves ragged and not take care of their bodies long term.
Right.
Bad advice. Don't like it.
Yeah.
But most of the coaching I received was like, you're going to do 1 illustration or you're going to do 5 illustrations. I don't think anyone ever sat me down and said, there might be a time when someone will ask you to do 101 paintings. And here's how you're going to plan it out. But fortunately, I really like planning and I really like lists. So I was just lucky enough that I enjoy sticking to schedules and checking things off.
Yeah. Well, what do you think people getting into this line of work don't understand or don't get, or maybe a better way of saying it is the people, what do you think people who like make it as illustrators have that people who don't? Like, what do you think it is that those who lack it, like the sort of that business savvy of becoming an independent contractor in this line of work? Like what are some of those skills that the people who make it have and the people who go to law school lack?
I think with art, a really important thing is separating yourself personally from your work. I think throughout college, people in my program were dropping like flies, and it was mainly because they got discouraged, because they thought that people didn't like their work, that they didn't like what they had to offer the world. There were really intense critiques. We would put work up on the wall and critique for 5 hours, and everyone would get all kinds of feedback. And I think a lot of the people that didn't make it made the mistake of thinking that the feedback they were receiving was feedback on them personally, which is not true. You've got to be able to see that your work is separate from you. It's something you make, but it's not you.
Right.
And therefore, it's open to improvement. And if people are giving you advice on that, they're not attacking you. They're trying to help you. So seeing, and that's illustration specific. A lot of fine artists, their work is them. They don't need to use their work as a tool like illustrators do. That's kind of the difference between fine art and illustration. Illustration is a tool. It's sort of beyond you. You're using it to communicate someone else's idea or just an idea of some kind. But the key to illustration is clear communication of a concept.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm going to paint what I feel.
Mm-hmm.
So, becoming a successful illustrator means seeing this is something I make. It can be improved. If people are criticizing that, it's not an attack on me. Yeah. And if people don't like it, it's not an attack on me. If people hate my work, they don't hate me. They just hate my work. And if they hate it in a way that's constructive, that's great. I'll use their feedback. If they give me things that I can improve, then they're helpful people.
Yeah.
And if they just are hating on my work to hate on it, then they're not helpful at all. And I can just throw that feedback right out and not be worried about it.
What was maybe an early experience of you dealing with negative criticism? And how did you not let that bruise you too much?
Well, I have two examples. I have an example of productive negative criticism and unproductive negative criticism.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Productive was back when I was still interested in science fiction and fantasy art. I had a portfolio review with an artist I really admired. And he looked through my work and kind of looked at me and just said, "You paint hands like hamster paws." For a minute, I was devastated. I was like, that's the meanest thing that anyone has ever said to me. And then I looked at my work and I'm like, no, he's right.
Yeah.
These people do all have tiny little rat hands. And that was helpful because I just, first of all, it's hilarious. I never forgot it. And whenever I do draw hands, I don't draw hands much anymore, but whenever I do, I'm just constantly thinking, like, is this hand right? Does it look like a hamster paw? Yes, fix it. Right. And that was, I don't know, that was could have potentially been a negative, devastating experience, but it was helpful, so it wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of oddly put, but you know. An example of a negative experience was when, and this didn't actually happen to me, but it did color my perspective on this person. A professor I had, one of the other students in the class was really struggling. She was asking him for advice. Her project just wasn't working out, and she was asking him, like, should I change my project? Should I try to push through this? What can I do to fix it? And he said to her, I would rather see you fail this project than start over now. You don't have time, so I'm just going to watch you fail this. Mm. And I totally lost respect for the guy because that's not helpful.
Yeah.
That's completely useless feedback. Just saying you're going to fail this and your work is bad and it's not working. That's just rude. That's not teaching.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I'm just going to watch this ship sink.
Yes.
You know, and just so long. Have fun.
Yeah, and if you're the shipbuilder, watch and sink.
Yeah.
You start giving them advice on how to plug the holes. Maybe the ship will sink anyway, but at least you tried.
Yeah.
So, and that devastated her, and I think she actually dropped out at the end of that year.
Oh, broke her completely.
That's the advice that I would say: throw it out. It's not helpful. Who cares if this guy doesn't like your work? If he doesn't have anything useful to say, toss it.
Yeah. Is there a particular failure of sorts that comes to mind that, like a favorite failure, if you will, like something that totally, it didn't work. It was spaghetti that didn't stick to the wall that you've really learned from, and it actually like helped move the ball forward more. Does anything come to mind?
I guess it kind of depends on whether you mean a failure in my eyes or a failure in someone else's eyes.
Well, I think all these kind of failures, I guess they only matter if they're failures to yourself. If they're a failure to someone else, I guess it doesn't matter. But to you, if it feels like a failure, how are you able to take that and then develop from it?
Well, there was a time, I think it was my first job Yes. My first job out of college was actually a job that one of my professors had passed along to me because he didn't have the time for it. And it was to create a family crest for this rich, affluent person as a gift. I don't know who these people were or what kind of money they were moving around, but somehow this Christmas gift to an uncle was high profile enough that they had their own art director managing it. So I got in touch with the art director. And an art director's job is basically just to make sure the communication between the artist and the client makes sense. Because you've got someone who doesn't speak art trying to get an artist to do something, and that's really hard. So the art director is kind of the translator. And their job is very essential in that regard. So I had this art director giving me instructions for all the things that needed to be on this family crest, which none of it was in my wheelhouse at all, but it was a job, and I was fresh out of college, and I took it. So it was this family crest, and it had to have these special vases on it. It had to have a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream in it. It had a cowboy boot. It had the person's childhood home. It was just this very odd family crest, and I had to reproduce their design in a painting. So I dutifully copied it all out, did the painting, and sent it off, and the art director came back and said, the client wants it to be less textured. Can you smooth it out a bit? And I kind of thought, okay, and I went in and smoothed out some of the more textured watercolor bits with opaque paint and smoothed it out and sent it back, and the client came back and apparently they just hated it. And the art director said, the client's looking for something that doesn't look painted. And I said, well, I have to ask, why did you hire a painter?
What'd they say to
Long
that?
story short, they killed the job.
Right.
They killed the job. I did finish it, but they didn't want it. They paid me a kill fee, and everyone walked away feeling embarrassed. So that was another lesson in, like, if they hate it, sometimes there's nothing to be done. I cannot paint work that doesn't look painted.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do that.
You can't write work that doesn't feel written.
So that's not that's not feedback I can work with. So I put it in the forget about it bin and moved on. And for my first job out of college to get killed was very discouraging.
Yeah.
And it certainly felt like a failure, but I think it was just yet another lesson in, like, this will be a funny story in a year, and lo and behold, it's a funny story now.
Yeah. What were the the next logical steps for you to like bounce back after that and not be crushed by it?
Just keep going.
Yeah.
get back to drawing stuff I wanted.
Mm-hmm. What
I think
was
it's sort of
project?
like a palette cleanser. I just went and did a couple paintings, just quick little afternoon paintings, which are funny enough now my very best selling card designs, and people ask about the originals all the time, but I think I just tossed them or something because they were just little afternoon paintings. Just to cleanse my palette and get back to something I really liked. I think those paintings actually got me those got me the bird note job.
Oh, all right.
The magpie and the hummingbird.
Okay.
Were just little miniatures that I did right after that job to make me feel better. I got some glittery silver and gold paint, and I just painted these birds and embellished them with silver and gold.
So it's kind of like on a whim.
Yeah.
And those are what you sent on postcards to this art director at Sasquatch?
Yeah.
And that got you this job? I
sent that, and I sent a really dumb drawing. Actually, the more I think about it, the more shocked I am that they hired me. I sent them a really dumb drawing. I had just seen on the bird feeder at my parents' house a cowbird and its adopted parent. So cowbirds, they're nest parasites. So basically, they'll just lay their eggs in another bird's nest and be like, "See ya, raise my kid."
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah, and when my chick hatches, it's going to be about 3 times the size of yours.
Yes.
It's going to eat all the food, and he might even shove your egg out of the nest.
Yes, exactly. So they're big birds and they lay their eggs in like the finch nests. So I was watching the feeder, and there was this giant baby cowbird with this little adult finch hopping around him, putting food in his mouth. And so I did this little black and white doodle of this giant baby cowbird with his little finch, and just a little word bubble that said, "Feed me, small dad." And it was the dumbest drawing, but I just sent the original off in one of my, like, in an envelope with a postcard. Uh-huh. And I'm almost certain that was the one I sent to Sasquatch.
That's amazing. Like, "Feed me, small dad." So I remember you saying that over the course of the Bird Note project that you were worried that, your first drawing compared to your 100th one was going to be, worse in comparison, because obviously you're going to improve from 1 to 100. Right. And granted, like, they're going to to the untrained eye, and they're going to, they shuffle them in different orders and so forth. And a writer has the liberty of, after they've written a whole thing, they can rewrite and make everything uniform and stuff. But it's not like once you turn something in, after you finish the illustration 100, you can't go back to the first one and amend it. It's done. So,
I would have if I could have.
Yeah. So how did you process that, and that whole thing of your development over the course of this project, and not get too bogged down by your that whole process?
I actually hit that up with a dose of my analytical planning as well. Mm-hmm. I got them to tell me what order they were going to be in, and then I figured out the order, and from that made a list of what order I was going to do each bird. I did all my sketches, and they gave me the list of how they would be in the book, and then I broke them up so that each batch of illustrations would be evenly distributed throughout the whole book, so that if I either improved or burnt out progressively over the whole job, those bad illustrations would be equally distributed among all the others, and you wouldn't notice, like, paging through the book, whether there was a clump of bad ones or a clump of good ones. I made sure they were all going to be dispersed.
Right. So maybe like the last 10 illustrations in the book that might represent like maybe one or two of like your very first illustrations. So
right, exactly. Like, if my first few were shaky, but those are numbers 10, 35, and 78. Or my last few, I was like, all right, I'm just going to power through this. I have to get it done. Those last 5 were numbers, 2, 25, 46.
Yeah. So, in looking at your work, there is an immense amount of like play and fun involved, especially with a lot of the bird stuff you do, and you do these cute little hats on so much on a lot of them. How do you maintain a sense of play and fun so that you do avoid getting burnt out?
Birds are fun. Animals are fun. I really never get sick of them. I really love that quote from Cy Montgomery during her interview with you, saying, I don't always believe in myself, but I do always believe in my message. I love that. I kind of live by that. Of like, I, as a person, can get burnt out or can get sick of art, but like animals will never stop being interesting to me, and they'll never stop being fun. And anyone who thinks that animals are a dry topic and they just sit there and don't I ever get sick of drawing feathers has clearly never watched a bird, because they're really dumb. They're really silly, and they do the greatest things. Animals are amazing, and they're fun. And it's not hard to make them fun. Yeah.
Like, what are you, with your art and specifically with the illustrations you've done with Bird Note, like, what are you hoping that, readers and just art lovers and bird lovers and are hoping to, like, what are you hoping that they're gonna, like, take away from this when they buy this book and see your beautiful work and the accompanying essays? Like, what are you hoping they take away from that?
I'm hoping that the same thing will happen to them that happened to me, where they'll see the images and they'll read the essays and then they'll start seeing it everywhere. That's what happened to me, and it was so cool because I learned a lot on this job. I'm not a bird expert, for sure. I had to be corrected by the scientists a lot because I didn't know what I was drawing half the time. I gave birds extra toes, which was embarrassing. I made things way bigger or way smaller than they should have been without knowing, because I didn't have the scientific intel of this is how a bird is put together. And so I learned a lot. And once I did a drawing, I started seeing that bird everywhere doing that exact same thing that I had just drawn it doing, even though I had never noticed that before.
Yeah.
Like I did the essay of red-winged blackbirds displaying on top of cattails. And I did that illustration, and I'd never really seen that. The males will stand on top of cattails and kind of flare up the red shoulders and just do this big whole display to impress the ladies. And I can't ever remark on having noticed that. But once I did the illustration of it, the next day I drove out to the coast, packed some marshes, and I saw all these red-winged blackbirds on the top of cattails displaying just like I had just drawn them. And it was so cool.
Yeah.
Or I did an illustration of a dipper, which are these little birds that will stand by streams and then just jump into the water and pop back out and get up on a rock and then jump into the water again. And I had never seen one before. Did the illustration. Next day I went on a hike and I saw a dipper in the stream next to the path doing that. And I don't even know if I would have noticed it if I hadn't had that on my radar. So I hope that happens to other people, that they just magically start seeing birds everywhere doing those things and just opening their eyes a little bit to what's around them.
That is cool. Nice. Where can people get more familiar with your work, online, and, your website, your social media presence, and where can people, find the book?
People can find the book just about anywhere books are sold. Your local indie bookstore is the best way to go. I'm biased because that's my other job.
Yep.
But it's, up on Amazon too, if you've got to do it.
Yeah, the big A.
And my work is on my website.
And what's your website?
epooleart.com.
Nice. And are you on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter?
Instagram.
All right. And what's the handle for that?
Epoole Art.
Epoole Art.
I'm a creature of habit.
Fantastic. Awesome. Emily, Beautiful work. Thanks so much for doing this. Being the first in-person podcast on this show. So thanks so much. You did awesome.
You.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Are we already done? Seriously? I guess so. Thank you for listening. If you don't already subscribe to the show, please do so wherever you get your podcasts. Extra credit goes to those who leave honest reviews on iTunes. We're knocking on the door. We're almost in the 40s. Knocking on the door for 50s. That would be a titanic achievement. I'm Brendan O'Mara, at Brendan O'Mara on Twitter and Instagram. Facebook is at CNF Podcast, and also at CNF Pod on Twitter. Hey, you want a cool monthly newsletter? Head over to BrendanO'Mara.com and put your email down. Book recommendations and news about the podcast. Once a month, no spam, can't beat it. I've got a surprise next week, but you're just gonna have to wait. You'll know when it's time. Is that a teaser? Yeah, I think it is. See you right here next week, CNFers.